Welcome to Night Stories from VHS Era. You've arrived at a place where the glow of old television screens, the hum of rewinding tapes, and the softness of forgotten childhood dreams come alive once more. Each night will take a quiet journey back in time to sleepy suburbs, moonlit driveways, warm summer breezes, and the kind of memories that feel just a little too magical to be real. Here you don't need to worry. Just press play and let the night unfold. Before we begin tonight's story, let's take a moment to slow down. Close your eyes. Take a deep breath in through your nose. Hold it gently. And now, exhale slowly through your mouth. Let the day melt away with that breath. Again, breathe in deeply. Feel your shoulders soften. Now, release and let go of everything you don't need to carry right now. Imagine you're lying on a cozy bed in your childhood room. Outside, the wind hums softly. The light from a small lamp glows like a warm memory, and the sound of a distant VHS tape spinning fills the air with comfort. You are safe. You are still. And the night is yours. Let's begin tonight's story.
Welcome back to Night Stories from VHS Era. Let me ask you something. Do you remember the feeling of laying on your bed the night before summer camp, staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly above your head, while the buzz of cicadas seeped in from the open window? Did you ever sit cross-legged on your carpet, packing your backpack like you were preparing for an expedition into the unknown, even though it was just a 2-hour drive away? And what about the smell of bug spray mixed with sunscreen, or the thrill of peeling the plastic film from a brand new disposable Kodak camera? Stay with me until the end of this video, because tonight you're going to remember exactly how it felt to be a kid again in the summer of the 90s, with nothing but trees ahead of you and time on your side. By the end of this story, you'll not only recall what you packed, but why each of those things mattered so much back then. It always started with the list. Mom would write it out on a piece of yellow-lined notepad paper, the kind with a red margin on the side. She'd tape it to the fridge with the magnet that looked like a smiling banana from the Fruit of the Loom set we got at the state fair. On the top, she'd write in big block letters, "Camp Packing List, Don't Forget." I must have read that thing 100 times, but it never got old. Each time I looked at it, my stomach would do that fluttery thing, the kind of nervous excitement only summer camp could bring. I'd sit on the floor of my bedroom, the carpet rough under my legs, and start gathering things around me like a little squirrel before winter. The backpack, always the same blue and red JanSport with the leather bottom, lay open beside me, ready to be filled. I still remember the sound of the zipper, the slight squeak of the metal as I pulled it back and forth just to test it. The flashlight was always first. A big, bulky, Eveready flashlight, the kind that took those huge D batteries. I'd check it obsessively, flicking it on and off, pretending I was already in the woods telling ghost stories. Did it matter that I'd only use it for maybe 10 minutes each night before falling asleep? Not really. It was the symbol of being out there in the unknown. A little slice of safety. Then came the bug spray. That familiar green can of off, slightly, sticky in your hand from last summer's residue. I'd always shake it before packing it, as if the sound alone would make me feel more prepared. My mom would peek into the room and remind me, "Don't forget to spray your socks too. Ticks don't. Play around." I'd nod like I hadn't already planned to do exactly that every morning. Next was the disposable camera. Always a fresh one, sometimes two if we were lucky that year. Kodak or Fujifilm, it didn't matter. It had to have at least 24 exposures. I can still hear the winding sound it made when you clicked the shutter. That little whir, followed by the feeling of accomplishment. like you just captured a moment forever. I didn't know it then, but most of the pictures would come out crooked or blurry. Still, I loved taking them. Campfires, friends making silly faces, the lake glimmering under the morning sun. All of it felt magical through that tiny plastic lens. Do you remember what it was like to choose which t-shirts to bring? I always picked the ones that had meaning. My Goosebumps shirt with Slappy the Dummy on the front. The tie-dye one I made at school in 5th grade. And always the one with the Ninja Turtles riding skateboards, even though the colors had started to fade. I'd fold each one and smell the faint scent of detergent, that lemony, clean smell that reminded me of home. Socks, underwear, rolled tightly like little burritos. A windbreaker that crinkled like a potato chip bag every time I moved. Swim trunks, with bright flamingos that made me feel cooler than I probably was. My Walkman, of course, with fresh AA batteries and a cassette of mixtapes Dad had helped me record. A little bit of Alanis Morissette, some Green Day, and a lot of songs taped straight from the radio. Remember when the DJ would talk over the intro and mess it up? Still, I'd listen to it with a smile, as if it were a secret playlist just for me. In the side pocket, I tucked in a handful of fruit roll-ups even though we weren't technically supposed to bring snacks, and a small notebook with a rocket on the cover. I told myself I'd write in it every day at camp, but I usually only made it to day 3. It was the idea of documenting things that felt special, like I was preserving history, my own little world, written in pencil with smudged edges. Was there anything more exciting than zipping up that backpack when it was finally full? Sitting on the edge of the bed, looking at it with pride, like I'd just packed for a NASA mission. I'd stare at it for a while, heart pounding a little. Tomorrow was the day. The bus would be waiting in the parking lot of the elementary school, and all the familiar faces would be there. That night, sleep didn't come easy. I lay there in bed, eyes open, thinking about the songs we'd sing on the way there, the smell of the pine trees, the first dip in the lake. I'd imagine the counselors, older kids who felt like superheroes with their walkie-talkies and sunglasses. I'd wonder who'd be in my cabin, if I'd get the top bunk, if I'd see Sarah from last summer, the one who wore jelly bracelets and could do cartwheels across the whole field. So many questions. Would I get homesick this time? Would I finally win the archery contest? Would the scary story around the fire still give me goosebumps? And the answers came. Not in words, but in the warm anticipation that filled the room like the hum of the cicadas outside. I didn't know everything that would happen yet, but I knew enough. I was going back to that special place, that little pocket of the world where time slowed down and everything felt possible. Camp in the 90s wasn't just about tents and mess halls. It was about friendship bracelets woven tight with laughter, mosquito bites scratched in the moonlight, and letters from home that smelled like Mom's perfume. Each item in that backpack wasn't just something to use. It was a promise, a flashlight for when the dark got too big, a spray to keep the little monsters away, a camera to catch the magic. And just like that, I drifted off to sleep, the kind of sleep that only happens when your heart is full and your bag is packed for adventure. The sun rose early that morning, slipping through the blinds and spilling across my bedroom floor in wide, golden bands. I didn't need an alarm clock. My body woke me up before it was even light out, like it had been holding its breath all night. I stretched slowly beneath my sheets, listening to the house around me, so still and quiet, as if it too knew this morning was different. The familiar hum of the fridge, the rustle of leaves brushing against my window screen, the soft creak of floorboards downstairs. It was the kind of silence you only noticed on big days. My backpack sat upright by the door, looking ready and proud. It reminded me of a loyal pet, patiently waiting for adventure. I sat up in bed and took one last look around my room, at my posters, my baseball cards still lined up on the shelf, the lava lamp bubbling softly in the corner. It was all staying here. I, on the other hand, was going somewhere else entirely. Downstairs, the smell of cinnamon toast drifted through the air, sugary and warm. Mom was already in the kitchen, dressed in her denim shorts and her worldsy best mom. Tea that she wore for occasions like this. She smiled at me when I walked in, holding out a glass of orange juice. I remember thinking how everything felt brighter, like someone had turned the saturation up on the whole day. The toast crackled from the toaster. Dad shuffled into the room with his mug of black coffee, rubbing sleep from his eyes. His hair stuck up on one side like it always did. They didn't talk much while I ate. I think they knew not to. There was a kind of heavy sweetness in the air, a quiet agreement that the more we talked, the harder it might be. So we kept it simple. "Got everything?" Dad finally asked, his voice low and soft. I nodded, mouth full of toast. I didn't really trust my voice yet. I didn't want it to shake. The ride to the school parking lot felt too fast. I sat in the back seat, fingers tracing shapes on the fogged-up window, watching familiar streets pass by in a blur. We drove by the corner gas station where I used to buy push pops, the baseball field where I struck out twice but hit one perfect home run, and the park with the blue slide that gave me my first grass stain. Every piece of my little world waved goodbye. The parking lot was already half full. Yellow school buses lined up like giant caterpillars, their windows slightly open, their engines rumbling quietly like they were waking from hibernation. Kids ran in every direction, some shouting, some hugging, others already crying. Counselors in matching t-shirts stood in clusters, holding clipboards and shouting out names like they were leading an expedition. Do you remember that mix of emotions? That strange cocktail of butterflies and rockets in your chest, the kind that made you feel like you could fly and puke at the same time? I stood there next to the car, my backpack strapped on, and suddenly the weight of it reminded me just how far from home I was about to be. Mom crouched down to check the straps, adjusting them like she always did, even though they were fine. She brushed some imaginary lint off my shoulder and smiled, but her eyes were glassy. "You're going to have the best time," she said, and her voice cracked just slightly. Dad stood nearby, his hands in his pockets, rocking on his heels like he wasn't sure what to do with himself. He gave me a nod, one of those dad nods that said everything. I looked between them and felt my throat tighten. Why was it so hard to say goodbye, even when I wanted to go so badly? I mean, this was it. Freedom. No bedtime, no vegetables, no chores. I was about to be surrounded by friends, trees, lakes, and s'mores. And still, a small part of me clung to their voices, to the smell of Mom's perfume, to the shape of Dad's hand ruffling my hair. "I'll write you," I managed to say, trying not to let my voice wobble. Mom nodded, her smile bright and brave. "We'll write back." Dad reached out, gave my shoulder a squeeze. "Take pictures, lots of them." I hugged them both, quick but tight, not wanting to linger too long. I had this fear that if I held on too long, I'd change my mind. And I didn't want to change my mind, I wanted to be brave. With one last look over my shoulder, I joined the group of kids being directed toward bus number 3. The steps felt higher than I remembered, like the bus was testing my courage. I climbed in, found a seat near the window, and pressed my face to the glass, watching as my parents waved from the curb. As the bus pulled away, I raised my hand and waved back, but I didn't smile yet. Not until we turned the corner and I couldn't see them anymore. That's when it hit me. I was really doing it. Do you remember that first taste of independence? When you're surrounded by people your age, all of you buzzing with nervous laughter and second-hand energy, and the grown-ups start to feel like part of a different world? That's what the bus ride felt like. Everyone talking at once, showing off their Game Boys, comparing snacks, or flipping through camp brochures like they hadn't already read them 100 times. I kept my window cracked open, letting the warm wind rush against my face. The sound of the wheels on the road was steady and soothing, like the heartbeat of a giant. Somewhere in the back, a kid started singing a camp song. Others joined in. I didn't know the words yet, but I hummed along anyway, excited and nervous. That was the best way to describe it. Like standing at the top of a diving board for the first time, knowing the water was waiting, but still needing that one final breath before the leap. I looked around and wondered who would be in my cabin. Would we become best friends? Would we sneak marshmallows after lights out or play truth or dare under the covers? And then I remembered something Mom used to say whenever I was afraid of something new. Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the thing anyway. So I sat, back in my seat, took a breath and smiled to myself. Freedom and homesickness lived side by side in that moment. I missed them already. I missed the kitchen and the quiet house and the smell of Sunday pancakes. But I also felt something new rising up inside me. Something that whispered, "This is your story now. Write it." And with that, the bus rolled. Deeper into the countryside, the trees getting taller, the sky getting wider, and the adventure finally beginning. The bus hissed as it slowed to a stop on the gravel drive in front of the main lodge, its tires crunching over stones baked warm by the afternoon sun. As I stepped off, the thick scent of pine hit me right away. Not the fake kind they used in cleaning sprays, but the deep, earthy perfume of real trees that had been growing there longer than I'd been alive. The air felt different, fresher, like it had been filtered through 1,000 green needles and cooled by lake mist. Camp Evergreen. The wooden sign swung gently on rusty chains above the entrance, carved letters painted forest green, with a chip missing in the middle of the G. I had seen it on the brochure, sure, but standing there now, it felt like something out of a dream. The cabin roofs peeked out from behind the trees, all cedar and moss and screen doors that slapped shut with the sound of summer. We were split into groups quickly, our names called out by counselors who somehow managed to sound both excited and exhausted at once. When my name was called for cabin elm, I remember gripping my backpack strap just a little tighter. Would the other kids be nice? Would I say something dumb and become the weirdo right away? But the moment I stepped through the door of cabin elm, those thoughts dissolved like powdered lemonade in cold water. The first person I saw was a kid sitting cross-legged on the bottom bunk, already unzipping a duffel bag covered in Ninja Turtles stickers. He looked up, nodded, and said, "You get top or bottom?" Like it was the most natural thing in the world for us to be roommates. I blinked. Top's good? Cool. He patted the mattress like it was sacred. Bottom squeaks anyway. That was it. No judgment, no questions about where I was from or what sports I liked. Just a bed and a shared understanding that we were in this together. Within minutes, the rest of the cabin filled up. One kid had a glow-in-the-dark yo-yo he insisted could hypnotize squirrels. Another brought a full box of Capri Suns and immediately earned everyone's respect. There was a boy who had never been to camp before, like me, and one who had been 3 summers in a row and talked about it like he was some kind of seasoned explorer. Do you remember how fast friendships formed when you were young? How, in the span of one afternoon, strangers could become people you trusted with your secrets, your last fruit snack, even your flashlight when the batteries died. That's how it was in Cabin Elm. We didn't need long introductions or perfect sentences. Just shared curiosity and the promise of a summer without grown-ups watching our every move. Unpacking didn't take long. We laid out our sleeping bags like treasure maps, organized our bunk shelves with flashlights, cassette players, and Walkmans, and arranged our contraband, because, of course, there was contraband. From deep inside his bag, the kid with the Capri Suns pulled out a zippered pencil case. But instead of pencils, it was packed with candy. Jolly Ranchers, Warheads, fruit roll-ups, even a single Charleston chew that looked suspiciously like it had already melted once and been resolidified. He held it up like a sacred relic. I call this the vault. We were in awe. I brought mini Oreos, another offered, pulling a sandwich bag from his sock. I added my pack of gushers to the growing stash. We looked at each other, all grinning like pirates dividing spoils. A decision was made, wordless but understood. We would hide everything in the empty cavity under the bunk where one of the slats had broken. It became our secret pantry, guarded by an old comic book taped to the front to keep it from being noticed by counselors. That first night, after lights out, was when the real bonding began. The crickets outside were louder than I expected, a kind of nature static that filled the silence between our whispers. The fan in the corner spun lazily, and somewhere down the path I could hear the distant splash of someone cannonballing into the lake, even though swimming was off limits after dark. We lay in our bunks, eyes wide in the darkness, passing snacks, from hand to hand, careful not to crinkle wrappers too loudly. We shared stories, some real, some wildly made up, about things we'd heard that might happen at camp. Ghosts in Cabin Birch, a raccoon that learned how to open doors, the time someone supposedly flushed a Game Boy down the toilet and caused a plumbing catastrophe. "Do you think we'll all still be friends by the end of summer?" I asked, not even sure why the question came out. There was a pause. Then, "Why wouldn't we?" said the boy with the yo-yo. And it was such a simple answer, but it made my chest feel warm. That first night, we laughed into our pillows, cheeks sore, eyes blinking heavy with sleep. Someone started humming a song from the radio, and 2 others joined in. I think I fell asleep halfway through the chorus, the faint taste of gushers still on my tongue, and the sound of friendship thick in the air like a summer fog. You know what's strange? I don't remember anyone's last name from that first night. I couldn't tell you where they lived or what their dads did or what grade they were going into, but I remember their voices. I remember the flashlight shadows we made on the cabin wall, the shared breathless laughter, and how I stopped feeling nervous altogether. Because in just one evening, our cabin had become more than just a room. It was a secret clubhouse, a fortress of trust, a world where we were all on equal footing. No one was cooler or tougher or smarter. We were just us. And as I drifted to sleep, curled in my sleeping bag that still smelled like home, I realized something. Home wasn't a place that night. Home was 6 kids giggling in the dark, tossing candy wrappers at each other, and whispering promises of adventures still to come. The sun dipped low behind the hills like it was shy, tucking itself away in slow motion. You could almost feel it pulling the warmth from the ground, leaving behind that kind of coolness that only summer nights in the woods could bring. We were told to bring our sweatshirts to the fire pit, and I remember pulling mine over my head, the familiar smell of home still clinging to the sleeves. The air had that perfect blend of pine, distant lake water, and wood smoke that would soon weave itself into every strand of our hair and every stitch of our clothes. They had been preparing the fire long before we got there. A neat pile of logs waited in the center, and when our counselor struck the first match, I held my breath without even realizing it. The flame caught like magic, dancing over dry kindling before climbing upward, licking the logs with slow orange hunger. It crackled and hissed like it had stories to tell. We sat in a wide circle, logs for benches, knees brushing, shoulders huddled close. Someone handed out wire hangers bent into makeshift roasting sticks. A big plastic tub full of marshmallows was passed around, and when it reached me, I took 2, even though we were only supposed to take 1 at first. Do you remember the first time you tried roasting a marshmallow? How you think it's easy, until the flame suddenly catches it on fire, and you panic and start spinning your stick around like a pinwheel trying to put it out. That was me. My first marshmallow went up in a blue burst of fire and dropped straight into the ashes. But no one laughed. Instead, the kid next to me, his name was Luke, I think, handed me his perfect golden one without saying a word. "Try not to roast it in the middle of the flame," he said softly. "Just near it. Let the heat do the work." There was a kind of quiet wisdom in that. I held on to it, and then the singing began. It started with one of the counselors pulling out a guitar from its case like it was a precious relic. He strummed a few chords, adjusted the tuning by ear, then smiled like a switch had flipped inside him. All right, who remembers The Great Big Moose? A few kids raised their hands. One or two groaned. I'd never heard it before, but that didn't matter. By the second verse, I was clapping along with the rest of them, shouting about moose and chocolate mousse and silly actions that made no real sense. We sang Boom Chicka Boom next, then On Top of Spaghetti. Every song had hand motions, exaggerated faces, and moments where we all pretended to hate how loud and goofy it was, but none of us really did. We loved it. Have you ever laughed so hard you couldn't breathe? Where the sound coming out of your mouth is barely human anymore, and your stomach starts to ache in the best possible way. That's how it was when we got to Camp Granada. The counselor sang it with this over-the-top nasal voice, pausing for dramatic effect after every line. Hello, Muda. Hello, Fada. And we were hooked. We leaned on each other, tears in our eyes, singing off-key and too loud, daring one. Another to out-silly the last verse. Even the quietest kids joined in, even the ones who hadn't said much yet. That fire had a way of melting the space between us, like we were all made of the same soft stuff once the sun went down and the marshmallows came out. One of the older campers tried to start a spooky story, something about a ghost in the woods, and a whistle only some could hear. But it didn't quite land. We weren't ready to be scared just yet. Not while the embers still glowed and our cheeks were warm from laughter. Instead, the counselor shifted back to softer songs, leaving on a jet plane. Country roads. Songs our parents liked, songs from the radio they always had playing in the kitchen, and we sang along, even if we didn't know all the words. We made them up where we had to. There was something special about that. Singing under a sky so dark and wide it made you feel small, but not in a lonely way, in a connected way, like our voices were carrying across the lake and into the trees, stitching us to the night and to each other. After a while, we laid back in the grass, marshmallow sticks forgotten, and looked up. The stars were out in full force, not dimmed by city lights or passing cars, just pure, glimmering pinpricks scattered like glitter on black velvet. I think I can see Orion, someone whispered. Nah, that's just the Big Dipper. We argued gently about constellations, made up our own if we couldn't agree. One kid pointed at 3 stars and said it looked like a Game Boy. We named the one next to it Twinkie Star, because it was kind of yellow. Isn't it funny how, in those moments, you don't need anything fancy to feel complete? Just a warm fire, a few sweet snacks, and people to laugh beside. We eventually stumbled back to our cabin, sleepy and smoky, with sticky fingers and full hearts. I remember pulling off my sweatshirt and smelling it. Really smelling it. It was campfire and sugar and a trace of pine, and somehow it already smelled like a memory. That night, as I lay in bed with my hands behind my head, I could still hear someone down the path humming Country Roads. Not loudly, just enough to know they were still awake, still caught in the glow of that perfect night. And in the quiet of Cabin Elm, someone whispered, "Best night ever," before drifting off. I didn't answer out loud, but I smiled into my pillow, knowing they were right. The mornings at camp always began the same way. Soft light filtering through the screen windows of Cabin Elm, birds chirping a little too loudly, and the distant clang of the breakfast bell carried by the breeze. But on swim days, there was something extra in the air. A hum of anticipation, a knot of nerves in the stomach, and always, always, that unspoken dread of one particular thing. The lake. Camp, Clearwater. Lake was breathtaking at dawn, mist curling over its still surface like a living thing. It looked peaceful, inviting even. But don't let that fool you. The water was cold. And I don't mean just a little chilly. I mean the kind of cold that hits you in the spine and takes your breath away the second your toes touch it. Why was it always so cold in the mornings? Was it the depth? The shade from the trees? Or maybe it was just nature's way of waking us, up the hard way. I remember the first time we lined up on the dock, bare feet on the weathered planks, our towels clutched around our shoulders like armor. The counselors stood off to the side with their clipboards, their whistles, and those ever-cheerful voices that made the whole thing seem like a treat instead of a trial. They smiled too much. That was always suspicious. "All right, kids," one of them said, "time for swim assessment." There it was, the phrase that made my stomach twist. I wasn't really afraid of the water, not exactly, but I'd never swum in a lake before. Pools were one thing, clean, blue, warm, with lifeguards and ladders. Lakes were another world entirely, murky, mysterious, full of unseen creatures and who knows what hiding below the surface. Still, I wanted to be brave. Everyone did. We stepped out one by one, down the metal ladder or straight off the side if you had something to prove. That first contact sent shivers up my legs. My teeth actually chattered. Some kids screamed just for the fun of it. Others gasped and turned around, begging to wait a little longer. But once you were in, there was no going back. Your body adjusted faster than your mind, and soon the water didn't feel as unbearable. It just felt like camp. The lake smelled different too, earthy and clean at the same time. The sun glinted off the ripples like glitter, and dragonflies zipped around our heads, sometimes landing on the surface so gently it looked like they were skating. I passed my assessment, barely. I had to dog paddle halfway across the designated area before I could touch the floating dock and climb up like a wet, shivering puppy. But I did it. And when I pulled myself onto that dock, coughing and breathless, something changed. It wasn't just the cold that left my body. It was the fear, too. Do you remember the first time you did something you didn't think you could do? The way the world feels different after. That's what it was like. Everything was brighter. The dock was warmer under my skin. The breeze didn't feel so cruel. I was still cold, sure, but now I was proud too. Later that week, they started teaching us strokes. Freestyle. Breaststroke. We practiced kicking with kickboards and floating on our backs like starfish. It wasn't just about swimming anymore. It was about learning to trust the water, to find your rhythm, to stop fighting and just move. And oh, the water fights. It started innocently enough. A splash here, a flick there, but once one camper launched a cannonball off the dock and soaked the entire swim group, it was war. Splash battles, sneaky dunkings, full-on sneak attacks from behind the floating ropes. There were no rules except not to get caught by the counselors. There was this one. Morning, after a particularly cold night when the lake felt like ice. No one wanted to go in. We stood there, wrapped in our towels, shivering before we even got wet. Then one of the older girls, Maya, I think, yelled, "Last one in's a rotten egg," and took off running. She dove in with a scream, and before we could think, we were all running too. Clothes flying, towels abandoned, laughter echoing. We hit the water like falling stars. It was so cold it felt like a slap. But then we came up, gasping and squealing and smiling so wide our cheeks hurt. That moment, suspended in splash and shriek, felt like everything camp was meant to be. After swim time, we'd sit in the sun on the dock, wrapped in towels that never fully dried, talking about everything and nothing. Someone always had a comb, trying to wrestle knots out of wet hair. Someone else was picking pondweed off their arm like it was a badge of honor. And slowly, we realized that the lake wasn't scary anymore. It was ours, part of our world now. A place where fears melted away, where cold turned to courage, and where every dip felt like jumping into freedom. I can still feel that cold water on my skin sometimes when I close my eyes. The kind that woke you up better than any alarm. The kind that reminded you were alive, you were brave, and you were exactly where you were meant to be. There was something about nighttime at camp that felt different. The woods, which during the day had been filled with chirping birds and rustling leaves, turned still and watchful under the weight of darkness. Crickets took over the soundtrack, and frogs croaked out deep, hollow sounds from somewhere near the edge of the lake. The path to the cabins, lit only by flickering lanterns and the occasional flashlight beam, felt like a journey through another world, one where imagination had full control. That was when the stories began. It usually started after lights out, once the counselors had done their final head count and the giggling had quieted just enough. Someone would whisper, "Hey, want to hear something creepy?" And suddenly the entire cabin leaned in, the dim light from a hidden flashlight casting long shadows across the wooden walls. Our blankets pulled up to our noses, knees curled, eyes wide, we were all ears. Why were scary stories always more terrifying? In a place like that? Maybe it was the way the cabin creaked, how the wind seemed to whisper just beyond the window screens, or how every sound felt amplified in the silence. Or maybe it was because we wanted to be scared. We invited it in, even begged for it. The first story I remember hearing was about a counselor who disappeared one night long ago, right near the lake. They said he went out in a canoe after curfew, chasing the sound of someone crying. He never came back. Some said you could still hear him paddling across the water on foggy mornings, calling out a name no one could understand. The story didn't even have a proper ending, but that made it worse. We listened, breath held, afraid to blink too loudly. Then came the classics. Urban legends passed down from cabin to cabin, year after year. The girl with the red ribbon around her neck, the hitchhiker who vanished, the boy who dared to sleep in the woods alone and woke up with someone else's footprints next to his sleeping bag. And of course, the infamous tale of the hollow-eyed camper who was said to haunt the old tool shed behind the arts and crafts cabin, leaving small handprints on foggy windows. Did I believe any of it? At the time, absolutely. That's the thing. At camp, belief was half the magic. The line between what was real and what was imagined got blurred the minute the sun went down. Every creak of the cabin floor became footsteps. Every breeze that rustled the trees turned into the sigh of a ghost who didn't want to be forgotten. I remember one night in particular. It was close to the end of our second week, and someone, Timmy, I think, brought out a bag of gummy worms and a flashlight and declared it was scare night. We circled up in the center of the cabin, flashlights turned under our chins, trying to make our voices sound like growls and echoes. Timmy told a story about a kid who used to sleep in our very cabin, Cabin Elm, who went missing and was never found. He said the kid's flashlight still turned on by itself sometimes, flashing in Morse code, trying to spell out help. We laughed nervously at first, but when the lights flickered, probably just a surge from the camp's old electrical grid, we all screamed. One of the boys knocked over a shoe rack trying to dive into his sleeping bag, and we couldn't stop laughing after that. The kind of laughter that comes from being just a little too scared to admit it. But even after the laughter faded, I couldn't sleep. Every little sound outside made my heart race. I stared at the ceiling beams for what felt like hours, trying to breathe quietly, afraid that if I made a noise, something might answer. A shadow shifted by the window and I held my breath. Just a branch, probably. Maybe, but still. Do you remember that kind of fear? The one that made you hide under your covers, even when it was way too hot to do so? The one that made you check under the bunk even though you knew there was nothing there? It wasn't just fear. It was a kind of thrilling vulnerability that only exists in childhood, where being scared was part of the fun. Some of the counselors caught on and started adding to the stories themselves. One even claimed he had found claw marks on the back door of the canteen. Another said she heard whispers in the trees when she walked alone at dusk. We hung on to their words like gospel, never quite sure if they were telling the truth or just playing the same game we were. Over time, some of us started adding our own twists. I invented a story about a ghost named Clara, who used to be a nurse at the camp back in the 60s. I said she wandered the grounds in a white dress, looking for a camper she once tried to save. The others loved it. They asked me to tell it again the next night, and the next, until Clara became part of our camp legend. What I didn't admit back then was that I told the story because I wanted to be remembered. I think we all did. We wanted our time at camp to matter. We wanted to leave behind more than just bug bites and Polaroids. We wanted our stories to live on. Sometimes I wonder if kids still do that today. Sit around without screens or music, just telling stories in the dark, letting their imaginations run wild. There was something so pure about it, so connected. In those moments, we weren't just kids on bunk beds. We were storytellers, believers, a part of something older than ourselves. And when the cabin finally fell silent and the flashlight was switched off for good, I would lie there, listening to the wind, to the creaks, to my own heartbeat, wondering just a little if Clara really was out there. There was something oddly comforting about sitting cross-legged on the wooden cabin floor, a sheet of lined paper resting on a clipboard, pen in hand, and no idea what to say. The counselors called it quiet hour, which really meant letter writing, time. And even though most of us groaned when they reminded us, we still did it. It was like brushing your teeth. You didn't always feel like doing it, but it made you feel a little more human when you did. Dear Mom and Dad, I wrote, over and over again, and then I'd stare at the page, chewing on the tip of the pen, trying to think of something, anything, that sounded more exciting than, everything is fine. The truth was, everything was more than fine. Camp was a swirl of activities, pranks, bonfires, whispered jokes, and muddy sneakers. But somehow, when I tried to put it into words, it all came out flat. We made candles today. Or, I got second place in the sack race. None of it felt like enough to describe what was really happening. So, instead, I stretched the truth, a little. I made my bunk sound neater than it was. I said I was making lots of friends, even when I sometimes felt invisible in a crowd. I added, we've been eating really healthy, while I was still licking marshmallow from my fingers. And I always asked for snacks. Cookies, chocolate, gum, anything not from the dining hall. Not because I was starving, but because getting a package with your name on it made you feel like the most important person on earth. There was a mailbox near the mess hall, painted blue but peeling at the edges. And every time someone dropped in a letter, it made this satisfying clunk that echoed around the gravel path. A counselor picked them up every morning before breakfast, and we always imagined our envelopes starting a long, mysterious journey through the woods, out of camp, down some winding road, into a mail truck, and eventually, hopefully, into the hands of our families. But the real magic was mail call. Every afternoon, just before rest time, a counselor would walk into the cabin holding a stack of letters, and all chatter would die instantly. It was like church. Everyone sat up straight, hope flickering across our faces as they began calling out names. Ben, Marcus, Sophia. And when your name came up, oh, the feeling. You'd leap forward, grab the envelope like it was gold, and run back to your bunk, heart pounding. Even if the letter just said, "We miss you, love Mom," it felt like a piece of home had found you, no matter how far away it really was. The first letter I got was from my older sister. It was a sloppy scribble, on pink stationery, filled with inside jokes and doodles and way too much glitter. I read it twice, then tucked it into my pillowcase like a secret. My parents sent one a few days later. It was neat and careful, with updates from home and a line about how proud they were of me. I didn't cry exactly, but I stared at their handwriting longer than I needed to, tracing the familiar curves of each word. Some kids never got letters. You could tell. They sat through mail call with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. So we started writing to them too. Little notes, folded into tiny triangles, left on bunks or slipped into pockets. You rock at archery. Let's be on the same team tomorrow. Your marshmallow skills are elite. It became a quiet, way of saying, "You're not alone." I started enjoying letter writing after that. I wrote to my grandmother, even though I knew she'd never reply. I sent a postcard to a cousin I barely knew. I even drafted a fake letter to myself, just for fun, imagining what future me would say if she could see me now. "You're braver than you think," it began, and I believed her. We decorated our envelopes with stickers and silly drawings. Some kids sprayed theirs with bug spray, hoping the scent would survive the trip. Others included pine needles or pebbles or pressed wildflowers like souvenirs from a world only we were lucky enough to live in. By the third week, I wasn't writing to get a response anymore. I was writing because it felt good to sit still and think, to pause, to remember that someone out there cared enough to wonder what I was up to, even if I didn't have anything all that exciting to say. Looking back, I think those letters were more than updates. They were bridges, tiny, handwritten threads connecting two worlds: home and camp, safety and adventure, routine and freedom. And even now, years later, I still remember how it felt to fold that paper in half, lick the envelope, shut, and drop it into that blue box, just to see if someone would write back. It started with a glance on the trail between the arts and crafts hut and the dining hall. I was walking with my cabin group, half listening to someone retell a joke about the mess hall mystery meat, when I looked up, and there they were. Just a kid from another cabin. But suddenly the trees weren't the only thing making my heart thump. One moment of eye contact, a quick smile, barely more than a second, and yet it hit like a splash of cold lake water. Everything around me shifted a little. The air, the path, even the way my shoes felt on the gravel. From then on, I kept catching glimpses of them. At breakfast, 2 tables away, at the archery range, waiting in line, across the campfire, their face glowing orange in the flickering light. They probably didn't even notice me at first, but in my head, it became a story. Every little thing they did felt like a clue, a laugh carried by the wind, a shared moment of tripping over a root, even a "Hey, pass me the marshmallows," turned into something I replayed 100 times before bed. My bunkmates noticed before I admitted anything out loud. I guess I smiled too much when we crossed paths, or lingered a little longer in places I knew they'd be. One night, while brushing our teeth under the stars, one of the girls nudged me with her elbow and whispered, "Someone's got a crush." I didn't deny it. There was no point. So, like any self-respecting group of friends in a wooden cabin full of bug spray and secrets, we came up with a plan. Operation Note Delivery. It began with the note itself. I rewrote it 5 times before I was happy. "Hi," it began. Simple, honest. I added a few lines about how I'd noticed them and liked their laugh. Then I asked if they wanted to meet by the big oak tree near the lake after free swim, just to talk. I signed it with my name, heart pounding the whole time, and folded the paper into the smallest square I could manage. My hands were shaking, but I told myself I was just cold, even though it was 90 degrees that day. Now came the hard part: delivery. There were rules at camp. Rules about cabins not mixing after lights out, rules about keeping boys and girls separate, rules about no romantic distractions. But we were kids. Rules like that only made the mission more exciting. 2 of my friends volunteered to be lookouts. One offered to do the handoff. We timed everything down to the minute, tracking when their cabin usually walked to lunch, where they sat during canoe drills, who their cabin counselor was, and how distracted he seemed during mail call. The handoff happened behind the mess hall. My friend walked up with a pretend message from another counselor, acting casual, like she wasn't clutching a life-changing letter in her sweaty palm. She handed it over, smiled, and walked away before anyone could question her. We watched from behind the flagpole, barely breathing, waiting to see if they'd read it. When they unfolded the paper, my stomach somersaulted. Their eyes scanned the note, and then, slowly, they smiled. Not a big one, but it was enough. Later that day, I found a reply slipped under my pillow. "Hi," it started. "I've noticed you too. I think you're funny." and brave for writing this. They said they'd meet me by the oak tree. Same time, just before dinner. I didn't even scream. I just held the note close and closed my eyes, letting the moment sink in. That meeting was nothing like the movies. We didn't fall in love or promise to write forever. We just sat on the tree roots, awkward and giddy, trading stories about how we hated swimming lessons and which counselors were the strictest. They told me about their dog back home. I confessed I still hadn't passed my swim test. We laughed. A lot. Said very little that really mattered, and yet it meant everything. Over the next few days, we'd wave across the field, smile during flag raising, share snacks under the bleachers. It was innocent and silly and exactly the kind of thing that makes camp feel like its own little universe, untouched by the rest of the world. And though it never turned into anything more than that, I can still remember the sound of the gravel under our shoes, the way the sun turned their hair golden, and how one small folded note made the whole camp feel different. Because sometimes it only takes a smile on the trail to make your heart race, and one brave little letter to make you feel seen. Camp wasn't just about letters, late-night whispers, or marshmallows over fire. It also meant war paint made from mud and grass stains that never came out, no matter how many times you washed your socks in the creek. When the weekly camp games rolled around, everything changed. Suddenly, we weren't just cabins with names like Maple, Pine, or Birch. We were teams, armies, legends in the making, and I was right there in the middle of it, my heart thudding not from fear or love this time, but from pure adrenaline. It all started with sack races. You'd think jumping around in a burlap bag would be easy, but try doing it with 20 other kids screaming beside you, a counselor blowing a whistle like it's the Olympics, and your cabin chanting your name like you're carrying their entire reputation on your back. I fell twice, maybe 3 times, but I kept going, knees scraped, teeth gritted, arms flailing wildly as I tried to keep my balance. When I crossed that finish line, dead last, by the way, I got tackled by my team in a giant laughing heap. No one cared about winning. Not really. It was about showing up, getting dirty, and laughing until your stomach hurt. Next came tug of war. Nothing bonded a cabin like gripping a rough rope, digging your heels into dry grass, and pulling like your life depended on it. Our opponents were bigger, stronger. One of their kids was already growing a mustache, I swear. But our team had something else. Chaos. Pure, unfiltered chaos. We screamed so loud it threw them off. Someone started yelling an impromptu war chant, something about pine power and fear the squirrels, and we all joined in, pulling with every ounce of strength we had. My hands burned, my arms shook, and just when I thought we were going to lose, something shifted. They slipped, the rope jerked, and we won. We fell over backwards in disbelief, half crushed by each other's weight, laughing like lunatics. But the crown jewel of all camp games was capture the flag. It wasn't just a game, it was an event, a spectacle. Camp-wide, with lines drawn, in dirt, flags made from old t-shirts, and strategies whispered like military secrets behind trees. Our cabin stayed up late the night before, plotting where we'd hide, who'd guard the jail, and who'd be our secret ninja runner. I got the job of distractor. Basically, I had to be loud, unpredictable, and impossible to ignore. Turns out, that's my hidden talent. When the game began, I bolted straight toward the enemy zone, flailing my arms, singing off-key, and shouting things like, "Free cookies by the lake." It worked. They chased me. I ran like my life depended on it, ducking behind bushes, diving into tall grass, pretending I was some kind of spy in a movie. Meanwhile, my teammate snuck past and grabbed the flag. We didn't win that round. They tagged him before he made it back. But it didn't matter. We were legends in our own minds. And maybe that was the point. By the end of the day, we were covered in dirt and bruises. My knees looked like I'd rolled through gravel, which I kind of had, and someone had ripped their shirt during a heroic dive into enemy territory. But none of us cared. We wore our scrapes like medals. We laughed about who had cheated, everyone, and who had tried to climb a tree, also everyone. The campfire that night felt different, warmer, louder, full of shared glances and stories shouted over each other. That day reminded me why camp was magic. Not because we were good at everything, but because we weren't. We fell. We failed. We fought over who got to go first, then held hands on the walk back to our cabins. It was messy and loud and absolutely perfect. Somewhere in the chaos of competition, we learned to trust each other, to cheer for the slowest runner, to laugh when we lost, to yell when we won. And through it all, we became a team. Not just for the games, but for everything else camp would throw our way. You always think it won't happen to you, that you'll be the strong one, the one who says goodbye with a high five, a see you next year, and maybe a cool nod like camp wasn't the most soul-shaking thing that ever happened. But on the last morning, with duffel bags packed and sleeping bags rolled tight, none of us could keep it together. It wasn't dramatic or loud at first, just a quiet heaviness in the air, like the trees themselves were holding their breath. Someone cried during breakfast. No one teased them. We just kept eating in silence, stealing glances at the people we now couldn't imagine mornings without. The same people we'd only met a week or two ago. Funny how time stretches at camp. 1 week could feel like a lifetime, when it's spent learning names, inventing inside jokes, and whispering about crushes under mosquito nets. We had built something. A weird, chaotic, beautiful little world. And now we had to let it go. Cabin goodbyes were the worst. We tried to play it cool, write me, text me when you get back, don't forget the squirrel chant, but our voices cracked. The kid who snored the loudest and never shared his snacks hugged me so tight I thought he might never let go. We'd sworn we'd stay in touch, promised to meet next year, maybe even visit over spring break. And maybe we would, but even if we didn't, I knew I'd carry each of them with me, tucked into the folds of every memory from this place. The bus ride back was almost completely silent. No games, no singing, just faces pressed to windows, watching the trees blur past, each one a reminder of what we were leaving behind. I pulled out the friendship bracelet someone had made me by the lake. It was crooked and a little loose, but I tied it on like it was the most valuable thing I owned. Maybe it was. It meant I had been seen, that I mattered to someone. That, for 10 wild, sticky, unforgettable days, I belonged. I cried when I saw my parents, not because I missed them, though I had in waves, but because I knew I wasn't the same kid they had dropped off. Something had shifted. I had faced freezing lakes, told ghost stories that scared even me, lost races and won secret glances. I had laughed until my stomach hurt. I had cried when the lights were out and no one could see. I had learned how to be brave, how to be ridiculous, and how to be real. Later that night, after the stories had been told and the marshmallow-stained clothes thrown into the laundry pile, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. My room felt too quiet, too clean. I missed the sound of whispers, the creak of the bunk bed, the wind moving through pine needles. I closed my eyes and tried to replay every moment, every silly song, every muddy game, every stolen cookie. I wanted to bottle it up, keep it safe. Camp wasn't just a place, it was a feeling, a collection of moments that would echo inside me long after the bug bites faded and the dirt washed off. I knew I'd never forget it. I didn't want to, because somehow, in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by strangers who became friends, I had found a piece of myself I didn't know was missing, and I wasn't letting go of that, ever. So I promised, out loud and to myself, that I'd come back, even if it wasn't to the same cabin, or the same kids, or even the same lake. I'd find that feeling again, I'd chase it, because now I knew what it felt like to belong, to grow, to live wildly and fully and completely in the moment. And once you felt that, you never really leave camp. Not completely. A part of you stays behind, hidden in the trees, laughing with the others, waiting to be remembered. And I will remember. Always.